Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Jim Kleiber Show. I am obviously Jim Kleiber, and today with me I have a good friend named Nancy Loitz, and we are going to be having quite a raucous discussion. If this is,
We shall see.
if this is reminiscent of conversations we've had before in the past, and just to give you a little layout of the call, I like to do a quick intro where I introduce myself, she'll introduce herself, and say what we expect to happen or hope to happen. And then we will go into the discussion. And then at the end, we will just do a quick reflection to see what we learned or what shocked us or surprised us. So just to start off, for people who have never heard my name or heard one of these episodes, I'm Jim Kleiber. I have done a lot of work in emotions for the last 12 years, since about 2012, when I quit two innovation consulting firms to move to Colorado and build an app called iFeelio. The idea of iFeelio was to basically give us a private space to journal on our phones about how we are feeling. And when I say we, I mean me. It was mostly about giving me a private space to journal about this and get better at being honest with myself about how I was feeling. From there, I moved to California, fell in love, then broke up and
Oh boy.
created a class called Emotional Self-Defense, with the whole idea of being, how do I deal with rejection and guilt tripping and being accused of manipulating and all these different things and still respond in a loving way. And yeah, I've run workshops in Germany and Africa, and I used to live in East Africa and Latin America, and been around, but just really grateful that I'm still interested in this topic after 12 years. So I actually met Nancy because a very good friend of ours named Anne introduced me to this work called Alba, and she told me I think I was still in California in 2016 or 15. Hey, you really need to do this Alba thing. I was sure. She's like, no, you really need to do this Alba thing. And then finally, during COVID, I had an opportunity to take Alba with Anne, with Nancy as the instructor trainer, and was so grateful to go out to Illinois to take that class with Nancy. And from there, have just been really grateful for what Nancy has done, and really admire a lot of the work that she does as well. And would like to pass it on to Nancy. So Nancy, if you could just say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, I am a professor of theater arts at Illinois Wesleyan University, which is right smack halfway between St. Louis and Chicago. I've been here 37 years, and I have about 6 weeks to go, and then I'm retired. So retired from this position at any rate. My heart and my passion is really in the Alba Method, and that's what I hope to continue teaching away from campus in other locations after I've retired. And I began working with the Alba Method in 1983, so 31 years present. And I grow it a little bit more and more as I work with it. So that's me in a nutshell.
Oh, great. Yes, and we'll get obviously much more into the Alba Method as we go. What I hope to happen in the conversation is that, we dive deeper into Alba, not only what it is and your experience with it, but how it impacts your life, how it impacts the lives of other people outside of the acting sphere, which
absolutely.
it's often used for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how it maybe intersects with conflict and other things that are happening for us. So trying to see the integration of it from my side more so. Is there anything specific that you're excited to talk about? Or
I think that's, I would mirror that thought, its application outside of theater. While it was developed for actors primarily, and I've taught actors primarily, I've taught other people from other walks of life as well. And that's where I think its power lies, more so than, it does have a lot of power in acting because it's so good for the human being. So it's good for all human beings, and a more emotionally available actor is going to be a better actor. but it's not just beneficial for them by any means.
All right, let's jump into it. So Nancy, what is Alba?
Well, that's
Besides a Spanish word.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Alba, briefly, we have a lot of time to talk, so I'm sure we'll go into it in more depth later. But kind of the short version is that it is an entirely physiological approach to the development of emotional intelligence. I would say that's kind of a catch-all phrase. But it at least helps people, I think, who aren't aware of what it is to get a starting point on what we're talking about. So as I said, it's completely physiological. It's not psychological in any way. It's totally physiological. And through learning the Alba Method, you become more emotionally aware, not just of your own emotional experience, but the emotional experience of others. And for actors in particular, it allows you to enter and exit emotional states in a way that is safe and predictable, and fluid. I guess it gives you complete control over the emotional journey of a character.
How do you think that is similar in one's normal life, that it allows you to exit and enter emotional states more?
Not so much, because when we teach Alba, we're teaching the physiological aspects of the emotion separate from content and separate from context. And so that's what makes it safe to learn it, because we are not tying, let's take anger for an example. We are not tying the anger that we are accessing to a memory, to a relationship, to an imaginary circumstance. It's totally physiological and it has no context. Therefore, when I'm guiding a student to leave anger, they can leave it with a clean mind and with a clean heart. Whereas if in life, emotion has context. All right. You're angry for a reason. You're angry at a person. You're angry at a situation. So I could guide you through the exit of the Alba piece of what you're doing in your anger, I suppose. But I'm not a therapist, so I don't do that. But the situation is still going to be there. The context is still going to be there. And Alba's not going to erase that from your life or from your thinking process. Alba is physiological. It's not cognitive, and it's not psychological. And in life, the cognitive and the psychological go hand in hand with the emotion.
So when I was talking with Mary the other day, who is a therapist counselor, she had an article about how it's not just mental health, there's also the physical component, and how there's the interplay between the two. And it sounds like what you're saying with Alba is that it tries as much as possible to be just the physical, just the physiological contributor.
It doesn't just try to be, it is just the physiological. That's what I love about it, because it's so disciplined and so specific that is what it is.
Which can, as somebody who is taking it as a student and not so familiar with it, which can be disorienting in a way.
Absolutely.
Because so often we have both components. We have the body shouting at us for a certain emotional state, but then we have the thoughts coming into mind to reinforce that or escalate it, sometimes de-escalate, but sometimes to reinforce it.
Exactly.
I'm feeling angry, and then I say, he's such an idiot. And then now it goes deeper and deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes this distinct from other approaches that actors have used to create an emotional state. Now, going back to what you said, though, about does it, I can't remember how you phrased the question, but
easily enter and exit or whatever.
No. But back when you talked about in real life, can it give you a safe entry and exit? Yeah, that's right. Safe entry and exit from the emotion in real life. No, it can't completely, eliminate it, because it's got these other things going on. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have a positive impact, because what it does do is allow you to sense in your body an emotion sometimes before you would recognize it psychologically or cognitively. So I'll be in a faculty meeting, for example. I always use that as my example for anger, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on in that room. A lot of laughter too, a lot of joy. Well, maybe some joy, but anyway. So when I'm in a faculty meeting, I can start to sense in my body that I'm feeling anger, that at very tiniest level, because I know where my breathing sits in anger. I know what happens to my eyes in anger. I know what happens to my jaw in anger. And so I will sense it, and I'll say, wait a minute, what is that? All very quickly, of course, because we think very quickly. And then I'll say, I'm angry. And then I can intellectually very quickly go, why am I angry? And then I can make a choice what to do with that anger. For example, if somebody just said something very offensive, then that anger is justified, right? And it gives me time very quickly and much earlier than it would otherwise to decide to call that person out and say, what you just said was very offensive, and I don't appreciate it. Or I think you owe John over here an apology, because that was really out of line. However, I might sense the anger and go into my head and say, why am I feeling angry? And I might say, you know what, I'm defensive. He just said something that I took umbrage at, and it's not appropriate for me to be defensive. So I need to kind of calm this so that I can listen. And then I can choose to modify my breath a bit or my posture a bit. Doesn't mean the anger is necessarily going to go away completely, but I'm making a choice about how I'm going to respond to it. And I don't articulate it.
And so almost in a way, it is physiological, but you get better at recognizing cognitively the physiological.
Exactly.
So it does bridge the gap between the two.
Absolutely.
You're not just feeling it in the body. You are aware you're feeling it where in the body, at which point,
exactly.
At which level, intensity, etc.
Exactly. And so as soon as I feel it in my body, then I recognize that I'm actually feeling the subjective emotion, but I'm recognizing it earlier. And anger is a good example, because in life, sometimes anger can come very quickly. Sometimes it sneaks up on us very, very slowly. But in many instances, it's out of our control before we, and we act on it before we've had time to process why I'm feeling angry and what I should do about it.
The metaphor that came to my mind is almost like an early warning system that we have for hurricanes or tornadoes, or it's like, hey, this thing's coming. It's coming. And sometimes it's coming whether you want it to or not. So even if you become aware of it, it's maybe sometimes you can't slow it down so much, but you can be aware that it's about to come, and you don't punch them in the face, you go punch a wall or whatever.
Exactly.
You can redirect the hurricane in a way.
Yeah. And what's also nice about it, unlike the hurricane warning, it's private and it's subtle. It's not an announcement I'm making to the whole room. It's private, and I get to choose whether to make it public or not. But this all happens very, very quickly. So it's not like I'm stopping everything saying, hey, wait, everybody, I'm having an emotional awareness. Give me a moment.
Pause. I feel anger slowly creeping up.
So it's not like that. It's instantaneous.
So so it's private when you feel it and recognize it in yourself. But Alba also helps us recognize these signs in others as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I say it's private, maybe I should backtrack a little bit. It's private in terms of the thought, the thinking part of it. Okay. In terms of, I'm feeling this. Why am I feeling this? What am I going to do about it? And then the action. That doesn't mean the emotion itself is necessarily private.
The physiological, yeah.
Well, not just,
Oh.
yeah, just a lot of the external parts. If somebody is very keenly aware of emotion or have strong emotional intelligence, they may pick it up too. They may pick it up that I'm feeling a little angry, and then they have their own thing going on in their head. Ooh, Nancy's feeling angry. Now, if they are emotionally aware, they get to choose how to respond to it, the same as I'm choosing how to respond to it. If they aren't very emotionally aware, they may say, what's going on over there, Nancy? Are you pissed at me or what? Because they may just feel that small piece of it. So it goes both ways. But yeah, I don't know, does that...
Oh yeah. So I mean, what I'm really curious about is, so one thing I've struggled with in my life is that as I became more aware of how I was feeling, I became more aware of how other people were feeling.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
other people weren't so aware of how they were feeling. And I would be like, oh, it looks like you're angry. I mean, the story I tell over and over again is my buddy, he's like getting into a heated discussion with a friend. And I said, oh, it looks like you're angry. And he stands up, pounds his fist on the table and says, I'm not angry. And I'm like,
Yeah,
but...
exactly.
And so I try to tell people, and I try to remind myself that me staying aware, me staying connected to emotions is actually for my safety. Because if somebody gets really angry and they're unaware of it, they might punch me or stab me or do something like this. And so, but at the same time, it can really frustrate me and other people when something is so obvious to me that they're feeling something. I don't know exactly what they're feeling or exactly what they're thinking about, but I have I have pretty good intuition that something is happening.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they deny it strongly. How does that impact your life?
Well, I guess I would, in terms of the scenario you gave me, there's another choice you could make when you recognize that in somebody. You don't have to call them out. And so let me give you my example that I always go to in terms of that heightened awareness. When I first learned this technique in 1993, I learned it my initial training was in Chile. And when I came back to the States, it was during a sabbatical. I came back to the States and I was teaching a group of young actors, newly out of high school, in their first acting class. And of course, my awareness of emotion was highly peaked, right? I was seeing it everywhere. And, some of my students now say, as they're walking down the street, in their head, they're going, sadness, anger, joy, fear. They're just recognizing it like people are wearing it, written across their foreheads, because our ability to read it just becomes hypersensitive. So I'm in acting class, right? And I had not figured that out yet. And I had not realized what I was doing. But at one point, I said to Karen Lachelle, I still remember who it was, and I said, you seem to be angry about what she just said. And she said, would you please stop doing that? She said, constantly, it's like you're reading our minds and it's making us really uncomfortable. And so what I had been doing is what you described with your friend, is that I was taking this new skill I had and just displaying it for the world. And that was a choice I was making. And it was a choice that was not helpful to these students. Instead, I needed to take it in and decide what to do about it. And usually it's nothing. But if somebody is particularly angry, and I feel it's an unjustified anger, or an anger that is not constructive, or that is potentially dangerous, instead of saying, stop being angry, or you're being angry, which can fuel the anger because it feels like an accusation, is I can then change my emotional state, which can help to de-escalate the situation. And before I went to, as a further explanation of that, before I went to Chile and learned this work, my course evaluations that students do at the end of every semester, 95% of them described me as intimidating, frightening, she scares me, And I could not figure out what that was about, because I cared about these students deeply. And after I learned Alba, I realized that there are certain elements in the way my body enters a space or enters a conversation that has elements of the anger pattern in it, even though I wasn't feeling anger. And to give you some examples, the anger pattern, and we haven't even talked about what patterns are yet, but the physiological aspects of anger has this real forward energy. It's got this narrow focus, and it's got some tension in it. Well, there's something else that has that, okay? They have those same things. Is drive, is focus, is determination, passion, a goal, which are all the things that are part of my personality, is that I'm very, very focused and driven. And if I have a goal, I go after it. And what I realized is those qualities were being perceived by my students as anger because they were receiving it that way. And it created a fear response in them. And suddenly it all made complete sense to me. And so then I made a choice to modify those elements or to tone down those elements that I was physically doing, but still do everything else I was doing in terms of my pedagogy. Didn't change anything about what I was teaching or how I was teaching it. I was just relaxing a bit on my physical manifestations of that drive or focus or passion that I had about the subject that I was teaching. And it's been transformative in terms of the student response to me. So course evaluations now are, Nancy cares so much about us. I love her passion. So I figured out a way to, I've learned so much about myself. It becomes much more about their experience with me as opposed to me and my energy in the room, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what came to mind is that we don't have to change everything about what we're doing. Sometimes just small tweaks can deliver the message even more clearly.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of times, I thought about love, which often I think we perceive as tenderness. Well, I want to talk about the patterns in a second.
It's fine. No rush.
But I think we perceive it as just being soft. And I'm like, no, love can be really strong. Or, soft and weak and passive and basically lacking the anger pattern, like missing a lot of that drive and that determination and focus. And so, I really appreciate you saying that, because maybe there are just simple ways to change it. I mean, it can be even in branding. I know Elon Musk, I listened to a podcast interview about him, and said that he switched from Twitter to X because he wanted it to be more hardcore. He wanted it to be more extreme. And so sometimes just thinking, okay, maybe if we just tweak the name or the brand, the colors, so not even just about our physical being, but other ways that we manifest in the world that can have enough of an impact to break the barrier you're talking about, where people don't feel so much fear and intimidation from what you're doing. There's still some, because this stuff is intense.
Well, of course.
This stuff is intense.
Absolutely. It's very intense. But see if I can find my train of thought here. Oh, back to the thinking, the ability to think about something. So not just in that faculty meeting example where I'm making a choice about what to do about my emotion, in the classroom example, it's also, what do I do with their emotion? And I have time to, because I can identify it in them at a very small level, or unless it's an immediate outburst or, a very sudden thing, if it has any kind of build time, or if it's at a very small level, I can perceive it and make a choice about how do I respond to it. The same as I can make a choice about how do I respond to my own. And sometimes I want to, if I'm talking about a student in particular, I want to have them keep on going with it. I want, if they've got an idea, but they're kind of, I want to kind of rev it up and get them going. And so I'm choosing that. If they're going down a wrong path and emotionally wrong path for whatever we're working on in the acting class, then I can dial my own energy down, and that can bring them back, if that makes sense, to a lower level of the experience.
Well, it's kind of this higher resolution monitoring of what's happening. It's more of a, instead of checking in every 5 minutes or every 2 hours, it's checking in every 5 seconds.
Just constant. It's just constant.
It's just like, or every 1 second or millisecond, you know what I mean? It's constantly checking in. And so you're like, okay, they're getting a little more angry. They're getting a little more angry, but I think it's okay. Like, they can deal with this. Let's see if they explore this. Okay, they're getting a lot more angry. Okay, maybe now we need
exactly.
to
Exactly.
Which, from someone, I used to teach salsa dancing, and with partner dances, it's very similar. It's monitoring. Okay, they're going too far in this direction. We'll be fine. Oh, they're going way too far. Okay, need to guide them a little closer back in, so somebody doesn't elbow them in the head, you know? So they get bumped by somebody. And so, especially on a dance floor, when there's a lot of different people dancing, there's so much monitoring of where I'm at, where she's at, where everyone else is at. Okay, that person is doing, they're separating. That person might come and do a spin right into us.
My daughter is a figure skater, and so
yes,
and so when they have practice ice, and there's all these different people doing these different programs on the same side, I think it's very similar, it sounds like, to the salsa dancing.
Yeah, but I think life is that way too, but a lot of us are so lost or so kind of overwhelmed that we're not paying attention to these things. And so I try to tell people, it's like a martial art. It's keeping us safe, you know?
Absolutely.
A lot of people think closing off and disconnecting from how we feel is to keep us safe. And I said, that's not going to keep you safe. It's going to make you more delusional in a way.
Well, and unsafe, because then we're no longer listening to our instincts. You know, that wariness that you feel in your stomach, you know, when there's something that you should be concerned about. You know, the classic example is a woman walking down the street at night, and, you know, you have this little awareness in your belly all the time as a female walking down a dark street, because you're hyper aware that something might happen. But in a normal interaction with somebody, you meet somebody in a social setting, and normally you'd feel completely fine, but there may be something in your stomach that says there's something not right about this person, you know, or somebody that you're working with, and you have that gut feeling, you know, and mothers always tell their daughters, right? Trust that gut feeling. Well, we have those gut feelings about all kinds of things, not just fear. That's a easy one to illustrate, because I think we all recognize that, but we have them in all of our emotions. And we're born with them. We're born with them to keep us safe, as you said, and to keep us connected. So not just safe, but to keep us connected as human beings, right? I mean, joy and tenderness and love and all of those things are designed to keep us connected. And we're born that way. You know, babies are born with all of those, because that's how they have to communicate their needs to their caregivers when they're babies. They don't have language yet. And so they're communicating through their emotions. You know, they're crying when they're hungry, and they're laughing when they're happy. And, you know, when they start to smile, to let you know they feel secure and safe. Their emotions are their communicative device. They wouldn't survive without them. But then over, you know, from birth to, you know, think of 12, you know, junior high, and all this potential trauma that goes on being a junior high student. We're learning in those years what emotions are bad, you know, and we start to push them down, and we lose touch with that instinct that we were born with. And we're constantly judging our emotions and judging our behavior, and going inside to our brain, into our thinking, and losing that connection to our body and to the bodies of others, because we've been untrained from that tool that Mother Nature gave us.
Do you think, as we push down the bad, I always do quotes on that, bad
yes,
feelings,
please.
that we also push down the good ones as well? Like, do you think it's kind of a... Good.
It depends on the personal experience. You know, some people, and that's why it's so interesting working with so many people as I have over the years, is that each person comes in with a new challenge for me, because everybody's emotional journey is unique. And so there are some people who suppress joy. There are some
Mm.
people I've had who suppress joy because people have laughed at their laugh.
Mm.
So they put a cap on it because they have a funny laugh, and they were told that since they were little. Or they don't have good teeth and they're
Mm.
embarrassed about their teeth. So they have unlearned a certain large smile. So it's not
Wow.
just those things we think of as bad that people have suppressed. It's not just sadness or anger or fear, which tend to be the
Mm.
ones that people label as negative. Any emotion can be suppressed, or mixed together. Some people, every time they get angry, they start to cry. That's a very common mixture. And when you're born, they're not born mixed. You learn to
Mm.
mix them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people are just afraid of feeling anger or feel guilty about feeling anger. And so they start to cry, and it's all become hardwired. They don't know that that's why, but that's the origins of it. But it becomes hardwired that way.
I think John Gottman or the Gottman Institute talks about meta emotions and the
Mm-hmm.
emotional reaction we have to emotions, like you're talking about, feeling joy, but then feeling embarrassed or ashamed because of the smile, or the reaction. I think I dated a girl once, and she like took a nap, and she looked so safe and comfortable and relaxed.
Mm.
She woke up and she freaked out. I was like, huh? But I think maybe, people sometimes in their lives, when they feel safe and comfortable, something bad happened. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we let our guard down, if I can't let my guard down because something bad's going to happen.
Right.
And so there can
Exactly.
be safety is bad.
Yeah.
It's like, well, safety is bad. So this is why I get frustrated when people sometimes will say, oh, good feelings and bad feelings. I said all feelings are helpful. They can be helpful and
But they've
useful
been
depending on the context. But
absolutely. But you have to re-educate them, and
it's
because we have been told that, not all of us, but many of us have been told that since infancy, and to just tell someone emotions aren't bad, and to try and expect that statement to correct all of that history, it's not going to happen, and you'll get resistance, and you'll get defensiveness about it, because don't tell me now that the way I viewed the world is completely wrong. So the way you enter that conversation with a student is very
mm,
important. Is how do
mm.
you talk about that so that it doesn't create more resistance or more physical tension that gets in the way of openness to whatever it is you're teaching.
I think from my standpoint, I feel confident in my ability to do that in a class because there is kind of the overarching, we're here to learn.
Right, right. So
But
they're more open to the idea.
yeah, well, and wanting to, in a way,
Mm-hmm.
at least having maybe more than 50% of desire to do it.
Yes.
but but sometimes in my personal life, I find it really challenging. Again, it's just almost like you said earlier, it seemed like we have sometimes can get into an emotional x-ray vision. Like, yeah, I could see what's happening. And but also just having fights over, oh, anger is bad. I'm like, no, anger is fine. Oh, anger is bad. Like, I struggle. How do you approach this sometimes when you're dealing with people just in your life and they're not your student?
Well, I don't think I talk about emotions in my life in the same way as I talk about them in
Hmm.
class. It's
Hmm.
not it's not my job in my personal relationships to fix someone's understanding of emotion. They're
Hmm.
on their own emotional journey. I mean, they're doing their thing. If they're in my classroom, I'm in a different role, and that's something that's taken me time to learn,
Hmm.
because you want to take this knowledge, you want to take this new understanding, and you want to gift it, to everyone, right? But it's not my place to necessarily undo all of what their life is. They've figured out how to cope. When I do character analyses with
Hmm.
with um, my students, and they're dealing with, I had worked on a play this fall where both the characters are severely damaged individuals. And when they first read the play, they judge these characters. He's rude, and he's this, and she must have a mental illness. They start labeling them with these different things. And after they've studied the play long enough, what an actor has to understand about their character is they are the way they are because they need to be to survive. And so the trick is to understand them, not to judge them. And I guess I think the same thing about people in real life, not characters. But for the most part, people are doing the best they can with what they have. And I don't think it's my place to go in and say, you're living your life emotionally wrong, or your emotions are not the ones that you should be having, or because it's much more complex than that. And over time, I've learned that it's not my place, but it's taken me a long time, because when I first came back, as I said, I was saying, oh, you're so angry. Oh, you're sad. Oh, what's wrong? And I was nosing my way into their personhood. It's private, their emotions are their emotions. And so it doesn't, but if they come to me for advice, or if I'm counseling a student through an advising session and I'm seeing something, or I'll ask a question and see if that can start a conversation that's helpful and within the boundaries of our relationship. I guess it's about boundaries,
So this brings up actually something I was really excited to talk about.
Okay.
So you say they are their emotions, our emotions, kind of boundaries, kind of the separation of emotion, yet there's a lot of evidence, I would say, academic and personal evidence of emotional contagion, that emotions don't just stay within
sure,
one person and that they transfer and we start to harmonize. And so one exercise that I remember doing in class with you was one person being in the anger pattern and one person being in the sadness pattern, and then just rotating different patterns, but typically the two people being in different patterns. And how much, or what is your experience with kind of emotions not staying self-contained and merging and harmonizing
in life or in Alba?
In life.
In life, well, of course they do. I mean, we are almost never in a pure emotion. Well, I wouldn't say almost never. First of all, we're never neutral. We're always in an emotional state, and we're usually in a complex emotional state. We're usually in a mixture. And I was just talking with one of my actor friends in Amsterdam the other day. She reached out to me. She's starting to teach Alba, and she was struggling with how to design the next phase of the course that she's teaching, because she's working with students who have some experience, and she wasn't sure how to take them to the next place. And so I talked with her about how to teach mixtures, because we live in mixtures. We live in a combination of things. It's very, very, very complex, the emotional state of the human being. So that's happening all the time. I think it's just the natural state of affairs, and that somebody else's mixture, I might only pick up one aspect of it. If somebody's angry and sad, depending on how emotionally receptive I am, I might just pick up the anger and I'm missing the sadness. And this person could be carrying a lot of hurt with them. And if I respond only to the anger and ignore their hurt, then I'm not doing them any favor by acknowledging what I see, because I'm missing a bunch of it.
And when you say respond, do you mean feel it, or
no? I mean, if I were to comment upon it, or if I were to, I feel what I feel, and again, I don't judge what I feel. I don't judge what I feel. I will acknowledge what I feel. I will take note of what I feel, but I'm not saying, oh, you shouldn't feel angry. I'm feeling angry. Why is that? What am I going to do about it? But not, I shouldn't feel angry, or I shouldn't feel sad. But
you're staying in the conversation with it and recognizing it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And the same with the person I'm talking to. I'm recognizing it. I'm processing it both intellectually and emotionally first. Right. So I'm processing their emotion, but I'm not sure if we're still on the topic of, in terms of.
Yeah. So in Alba, in class, when you're doing trainings, what do you notice when one person is in, let's say, a pure pattern and another one is in like a different pattern? Because I think what I noticed was there's some type of mixing from other people. Like I was absorbing some of the emotions that they were feeling.
Well, part of it is the difference between being in Alba class and being in life. Okay. So Alba, because it doesn't have context, and it's totally physical. Those exercises are designed for a lot of different reasons. So the exercise you're talking about is we call an emotional opera, where you're experiencing the space with emotions the same as you might singing, or an improv in acting where you're using text or whatever. But it's like an emotional improvisation where you're going back and forth. And when at the very early stages where I'm teaching it, and I'll say, I want you in this and I want you in that, and I don't want you to have an empathetic response to it. I want you to stay with it. I do that for a pedagogical reason, in that this work, in order to keep it safe and to keep it, and for you to learn over time that you have control over it as an actor, we're talking right now, you have to learn to discipline yourself not to go to an emotion just because you're feeling an empathetic response. You are choosing to go to sadness. You are choosing to go to anger in order to learn anger and to learn sadness or to learn joy. Because our instinct is going to be to start mixing them. I mean, that's what we do because we live in mixed emotions all the time, as I said. So that's where we're going to want to go. But this work, in order to learn the work and learn your instrument and get rid of those mixtures that we started, like the junior high person or the anger sadness person or whatever, we need to unlearn those, right? So I can't just let students move back and forth from emotions when they're first learning it, because then they're not learning the technique.
What I find in real life is that, like you said, we mix them. I think a lot of times we don't want to mix them, and we actually want to have, well, I want to be happy and you're making me feel sad. Stop making me feel sad. And, I just think about one relationship where she thought I was sad all the time because, we weren't having physical intimacy or something. And I'm thinking, I'm mostly sad because you're sad. Like, I'm feeling a lot of the sadness that you're carrying, but then comes in the denial of, I'm not feeling that sadness. It's
Right,
like,
right.
but it's written all over your body. Like it's piercing, it's a piercing sadness in a way. And yeah, I think Alba helps maintain that discipline, so we don't have that deeper empathetic response, especially in
Well, no,
class, right?
I'm saying
In class.
in class, yes.
But I think it's really, like you said, when the context is added in and stuff, like, and the mixed emotions, it's really hard not to feel mixtures. It's really, really hard.
So now you're talking about class, or you're talking about life?
Life.
Of course not,
Life.
because that's
class
how,
when we're focused on it, it's hard. Like when when I'm in sadness and I'm crying and the person across from me is laughing, it's very hard. I remember.
Of course it is. It is, because that's what we're instinctively doing in life, is receiving, responding. Yeah. And you shouldn't judge that. I mean, that's okay in life. That's what we're programmed to do. So I would hate for you to judge yourself because you're having a mixture. I mean, you're having a mixture because you're having a mixture. It's not a bad thing to feel both sadness and fear at the same time. Or
I think the challenges in life, like you said, we all come with different backgrounds on what our feelings we are or are not supposed to feel. And so when we start to absorb the emotion of that somebody else is feeling, and we don't want to feel that thing, it can cause a lot of friction. Like I don't want to, like, for me, I think a lot of times I can be really tender with people, and they are afraid of being tender because of so many reasons.
Right.
And then they're like, stop making me feel tender. I'm thinking, what? Should I be angry all the time? Like, do you not want me to be tender? It's hard. I like feeling tender too. Yeah. Okay, so I think we've talked about tender anger. Can we talk more specifically about the patterns, just so people understand the language that
we're talking about? Yeah.
The language, because, go ahead.
Yeah. So every emotional theorist has a group of emotions that they consider the basics. Okay. And different emotional theorists will have different basics. So that can be a whole other conversation. That would be an interesting episode of your podcast, I think, is why are Paul Ekman's basics different from Susanna Block's basics, different from whatever? Because they are very different. And they're actually, I was just reading an article the other day about they're adding one. Somebody just added one to their basics. But anyway, so for Alba, we use the basics outlined by the originator, which was Susanna Block, who is a Chilean research psychologist, or was. She's retired now. But so her basics, she has 6 basics. So the 6 basics in Alba, the Alba method, also called Alba moding, so I might accidentally go back and forth between the two, are sadness, joy, fear, anger, tenderness, and erotic love. So those are the 6 basics. Now we also teach neutral. So there really is a 7th pattern. It's not an emotion, but it is a pattern. And that's really what distinguishes it from most other emotional trainings, particularly in acting and probably in psychology as well, is teaching what is neutral and learning neutral, because we don't experience neutral in real life. We just don't. We're not programmed to. We just don't. And that's one of the reasons that exercise that you were talking about is to well, let me backtrack a little bit. The neutral pattern is taught in order to give an actor or a student, talking that way, a student control. All right, that you can always come back to neutral. You can always come back to neutral. If I've got you in a very deep state of sadness, for example, physiologically we can get you back to normal and it's gone. So that exercise that you were talking about, the emotional opera, is in part designed to reinforce that control, because it's the control that makes it safe and makes it controllable and predictable. So those are the 7 patterns that we teach.
And just to, I believe you agree, but the idea is that these are physiological patterns, and these are just the words that people chose to attach to them. It's not, the words aren't the most important part. It's the physiological pattern. Because like you said, anger, for example, could be determination and focus and or no, because when there's a lot of people who talk about there's a woman, Anna Wurtzbika, that comes from the linguistic approach of emotion more so, and so a lot of times the word anger doesn't exist in all cultures, but something maybe similar.
Similar. Yeah. Well, so I would not use the example that I gave you of determination and focus and those things, because what the similarity is that it's a degree. It's a degree of anger. Okay, so determination has a low level of anger in it. I mean, that could be a matter of debate, I suppose, that determination also has a cognitive element to it. So it has a low level of anger along with the cognitive of, I'm going to get this done. I'm going to do this. All right. So you might not identify it as anger, but in terms of physiologically, it is anger at a very low level. And once you learn the anger pattern and you start to do determination, you say, oh, yeah, duh, I get that. That is a small level of anger. It's in a very low level of anger. I remember, who was it that, it might have been Susanna. I can't remember who it was, but that if you see that, if you're going to start a race and you see a race, somebody that's beginning a race and they've got that forward energy and they've got that focus, that is anger that's being just before it's expressed. Okay, it's just ready to go, and that's kind of anger at a low level, is that runner that's just waiting to hear the bang from the starting pistol.
I guess my point, is that sometimes people can get really hung up on the words. Let me just put it that way. I think it was erotic love that some people call
Yeah.
it this, some people call it that, some people like even
That's a
within,
dicey one. That's
yeah,
the dicey one, I
well,
think.
even within the Alba community, and yeah, and
Yeah.
even neutral, I think some people called it something else, or
Hmm.
I think was it
I'm not familiar
Anne
with
was
that.
saying maybe it was calm and serene, or not. No, and that wasn't
Yeah.
calm and serene. It
I
was
would
something
not
else.
call it
Yeah,
that.
no, but no.
Because
From
those
what
aren't
she
neutral.
heard from
Oh, from other
someone
people.
before, yeah.
Yeah, erotic
Um,
love is a tricky one. The other thing, talking about the names, is because I teach in other countries as well,
hmm,
and I teach people for whom English is a second language, and so we do discuss the word and make sure that the people that speak a different language, have a different native language, that we discuss the word and say, what is the word in your language, and we do make sure that we're using the equivalent vocabulary. And that becomes particularly important when we do mixtures. So when I was talking to Jacqueline the other day about her class, and I suggested that she begin introducing mixtures, I talked about awe, because awe is
mhm.
a complex emotion. And that's a good one to work. But she had to figure out, okay, what is awe in Dutch? And so she was thinking, is it this? Is it that? And it took a little while of me explaining circumstances in which one might feel awe, in English, awe, for her to find just the right word in Dutch to communicate to her students. Um,
Yeah, it's almost like this concept that Anna Wiertzbicka talks about called semantic primes, where there are certain semantic concepts that we can't further reduce, like prime numbers. And so the way
Interesting.
that
Yeah.
Alba seems to approach it, and maybe Ekman and some others approach it the similar way, but having a set of emotional primes. And okay, if you're trying to build awe, it's 20% anger, or
Well,
like
it's
80,
funny that, yeah, it's
50% fear and like
Well,
20% joy. Who knows? Like,
it's funny that you should say that, because that's how I used to think of it, and I no longer think of it that way.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I used to think of that, and I know of one Alba teacher that I've heard. I haven't talked to him personally, but I've heard from somebody who taught him and then came to me, that he actually had created a grid that compartmentalizes all these mixed emotions with these little colors that
Hmm.
are 10% of this and 5% of this. And so I used to think that way too, until about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And Anne, our mutual friend Anne, was wanting to move towards teaching track, right? She is now a certified teacher. So this was while she was on that journey. And she wanted some more time with me. And so she drove down from Chicago, and my friend Tom, who has taken class with me as well and is a more advanced student, I said, hey, Tom, why don't you come in? We'll refresh both of you at the same time. So we spent about an hour or so just refining the patterns and moving them, one step ahead of where they were. And then I said, well, what do we want to do now? Why don't we play with mixtures a little bit? And neither one of them had worked with mixtures yet. And so I use Oz as my example. And I had in my head what percentage of things awe was. And I had told Anne about that before, just in conversation. So I said, let's try just sitting in this room in our circle, and each of us see if we can't feel awe. No context, just see if you can find what awe is in your body. All right. So I'm looking around the circle, and we all just found awe. And I looked around the circle, and Anne and I were very similar because we talked. Tom's awe was completely different. He had tears streaming down his face, but with this big smile. And I stopped and I said, that was amazing. So then we each described what it was, which emotions, which patterns we were finding sneaking into our bodies. And of course, Anne and I felt what I had described as awe before, which was a combination of fear and erotic love. Okay, that's
Mm-hmm.
what I thought of as awe. So that's what
Mm-hmm.
we were. Tom was feeling joy and an overwhelming, not sadness, but tears that come from almost the overwhelming overwhelming joy / tenderness of the beauty of, or the wonder of what he was looking at. So he was going back and forth between kind of a laugh and a smile and these tears. And his awe made complete sense too. So I said, okay, let's swap them. So I said, Ann and I are going to try and do your awe, Tom. And Tom, you're going to try and do our awe. And so I took on his awe and he took on our awe. And suddenly it was still awe, but it was a completely different awe. So while the basic emotions are like basic colors, mixtures are like mixed colors. You can't just say lavender and everybody's lavender is going to be the same. You know, some are going to have a little red in it. Some might have a little tinge of yellow. I mean, how many blacks have you seen? You know, you buy a black pair of pants and a black shirt and you put them together and they don't match at all. Okay, yeah. It's kind of the same thing, that's separate from looking at somebody else's. Yeah, that's black. But then you put it together and you say, man, those are completely different experiences. And so I was, so the ones we worked on that day, I think, because it was eye-opening for me. It was one of my favorite Alba experiences. And, you know, I've been teaching this, you know, I've been studying it for 30 years, but I've been teaching it for 25 probably. And every class I offer, I learn something new. It's so exciting because, like I said, everybody's emotional journey has been different. So they present with different challenges for me every single class I take, because nobody is emotionally the same. And so, so that day we worked on awe, embarrassment, shame, envy, and jealousy, I think. And so now at the end of a long course where students have a good understanding of the patterns, we do that exercise, and it is so fun to, and every time somebody comes up with a new mixture that I hadn't expected. So Jacqueline was just very excited about trying this exercise with her students. So I emailed her the next day and I said, how did it go? And she said, it was so much fun. She said, because she was feeling some resistance with the class because they had a different teacher for their fundamentals, and it's a more experienced teacher. And so when she was coming in and she's a little bit less confident on her feet, they were giving her a little bit of resistance, not consciously, but in their bodies. And so suddenly that all went away because she was passionate about it. She felt comfortable with it. It was something new. But they did envy. The one that was really fun for her, said, was having a crush on someone. And she said that was so much fun because there's so much that we're putting on to mask it, you know, so that we have a crush in private, but as soon as they come in the room, suddenly, you know, there's a little bit of fear going on, and then we have to cover it up with something else. And so you change the conditions slightly, or you change the context suddenly, and then the mixture is completely different. It's infinite.
I think that's what I appreciate about Alba in the class, and just Alba as a method in general, is that it seems to try to harmonize our agreement that anger is physiologically this. So harmonize it, like basically say, we agree that this word equals this manifestation in the body.
Exactly.
For you said,
for the purposes of this class.
For the purposes of this class, and for our conversation, so that we can have shared language and shared understanding of this maps to this.
Exactly.
It's a very mathematical engineering concept in my mind. I was like, oh,
no,
good.
It's absolutely true. And when to illustrate that point, when I was in Chile learning this with Susanna, the initial course was 2 weeks. All right. And there were about 14 of us in the course from, I think, 4 or 5 different countries. And then they left. Most of them left. The Chileans, of course, were still in Chile. But I stayed an additional 4 weeks. That was my plan. I was going to be there for 6 weeks so that I could get a real immersion in the work. So in the 2-week class, there were 4 Americans who didn't speak Spanish. there were 2 Danes who spoke English quite well, but didn't speak Spanish. There were 3 Chileans who spoke no English and only Spanish. There was a French woman who spoke only French. And there was Susanna. And Susanna speaks, she was native German, so she speaks German and Dutch and Spanish and English. I don't think she spoke French, but so she would kind of translate for all of us. Well, after our 2 weeks, 2 of the Chilean actors, Paula and his name will come to me, but we decided to continue working together. So I spoke no Spanish despite my 4 years of high school Spanish, and they spoke no English, but we decided we wanted to continue working together, and we could because we had this shared vocabulary, this very limited vocabulary of the names of the patterns and levels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We always do 5 levels, right? And so, and then triste is sadness. You know, so I learned the names in Spanish. They learned them in English. And we decided to work on a scene from Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. So any of your listeners that know The Glass Menagerie, everyone knows the gentleman caller scene. All right. So it is a pivotal scene in dramatic literature. And so we decided we were going to work on that scene. So we found a Spanish translation, and I had the English version, and we crafted that scene using only the vocabulary of Alba. And it was an experiment, but it was brilliant. It was so much fun because we were working on application without talking about acting at all. You know, we were just talking about the patterns and applying them. It was fascinating, but it underscores exactly what you are saying, is that in the classroom we agree we have this shared vocabulary, and it works because everybody comes into the class with that kind of acknowledgement from day one that this is how we're functioning.
And 2 things that jump out from me. One is that when we start getting into the mixtures and those other words, then, as Mary said on my last episode, that we almost get into a negotiation of words.
Yes.
We're negotiating, this word means this, no, it means this, it kind of means this. And I studied, my degree was in intercultural communication. So it's really about how across cultures we have very different understandings of words and syntax and all these different concepts, proxemics. But so what I like about it is that, okay, in Alba, we are agreeing that this doesn't mean this is the objective truth that will last for the rest of humanity. It's that we are just agreeing that this equals this so we can have a conversation.
Exactly. And like I said earlier, is that different psychological theorists have different basics. And so I say at the very first day, I said, you know, many of you study Paul Ekman in your psychology classes. And Paul Ekman says that disgust is an emotion, surprise is an emotion, love is not an emotion. Susanna says disgust and surprise are not emotions. And lo and behold, there are 2 kinds of love. So you can agree or disagree outside of class, but in this class, we're focusing on these for this particular technique. You know, I go back and forth all the time on whether I think disgust is an emotion, and that's for another conversation. But when I'm teaching Alba, I talk about disgust the way Susanna talks about disgust.
And I think what comes up for me and maybe for other people is that if we've taken any type of class or any type of expertise in something, there are so many varying opinions on it.
Absolutely.
You know, there are so many ways to dance salsa, and so many people think their way is the only way to dance salsa.
Exactly.
But as I realized in taking Alba, it's like, okay, Alba is a particular type of practice. It's like learning salsa versus learning bachata versus learning waltz versus these are styles of dance. And this is the style I'm going to learn today. There are different styles of martial arts. There are different styles of pedagogy. There are different styles of many things. This is the one I'm learning today. And This is the language that we're using. And yeah. And I like that because I think in our normal lives or our outside of class, that there can be a lot of conflict over words, and I try to help people. And okay, this is why I like to talk about things, and it sometimes frustrates them, because often I recognize we have different definitions of the same word, and the other person thinks we have the same definition. And so I'm trying to say, no, we see these words differently, because the example I often use is, okay, a vacation. If you're with a partner or something and you want to go on vacation, perhaps your definition of vacation is going and sitting on the beach and relaxing. With you, Nancy, it's probably not. I'm guessing you like to adventure more.
No way. I can't stand the thought of lying on a beach. You know me.
but the other person might be like, I want to go to the same beach every year and read the same book and just tune out. And so, okay,
you're describing hell to me.
Yeah, exactly. And so when the person says, let's go on a vacation, you're thinking, oh, great, we get to go travel, we get to go to Paris or whatever, we get to interact with all these different people. And they're thinking, no, I want to get away from everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for me, that's why I appreciate the negotiation of words, and also just kind of this mapping of awe is not the same for everyone. Joy is not, outside of Alba, joy is not the same for everyone.
That's right.
Tenderness is not the same. Erotic love is not the same. So many.
And partly because
anger is not the same. I know you're angry. The person doesn't see what they're feeling as anger.
Exactly.
And so then it's like,
it goes right back to what you said at the beginning of telling your friend you're angry and them denying it, because they maybe also are feeling hurt, and hurt is the one that's resonating with them at the moment, or that maybe something else is resonating for them. And for you to call out this other thing can feel to them as a denial of what they think they're really feeling.
And I try to practice and also teach and explore whether it works or not, to say something like that, but in a very qualified way. I think you might be feeling angry or something related to that. Because sometimes that opens up the conversation for them to say, I'm not that angry, I'm frustrated.
Right.
This happened the other day. I said, I think you're maybe feeling angry or something. I don't know. She said, I'm feeling frustrated. Oh, okay. I'm not angry. I said, okay, that's fine. That's a different degree.
I might challenge you to say, something's going on with you. What are you feeling? Rather than
make
label
it even more open.
Rather than labeling it, because that has, emotion words have lots of baggage, and who knows what being angry they were told as a child. What it means to be angry. And if they were told that it's inappropriate to be angry, and you're sitting there, you feel angry, even though you say it's perfectly valid to feel angry, that's not their history.
And even if it's highly qualified, it's still,
even if it's highly qualified, you're still labeling. And so, what I've learned, and it took me a long time to learn this, because I want to label everything, right? Because I've got, my answer. But to say, something's going on with you, do you want to share it? Or I seem to have, am I bothering you? Is there something I'm doing that you're having a reaction to? Or, somehow to phrase it as an open-ended question rather
even
than
more open-ended.
Even more open. Of course, it depends on the circumstance. There are certain times when I am going to tell you exactly what I think you're feeling.
And then they reply, but sometimes the challenge with being so open-ended, I found, is that I'll say something like, it seems like something is going on. Do you want to talk about it? And they say, I'm fine. You're like, now I'm stuck.
Now where do I go?
Now I'm feeling doubtful. I don't believe it.
Of course, then you go back to all those self-help books that use I statements, and say, what, I'm feeling kind of defensive right now.
Well, and this is what I liked about what you said earlier about when you started to feel the anger in the meeting, that you noticed it in the body, and then you started to not only notice the physiological signs, but you started, I think, to explore what's the context behind it.
Yeah.
So you started, okay, is it because of this? Or maybe it's coming from this. Oh, maybe I'm defensive. So maybe you thought about, oh, in the past when something like this has happened, this is how I responded. So I'm actually more defensive about the thing before than about this one. So you start doing kind of this cognitive exploration as well.
Now, let me qualify this, because I don't do this every time I feel angry.
No.
No. Yeah. I'm going to give you an example, because that's nice when it's coming up slowly. But oh my goodness, the other day in class, maybe 3 weeks ago in class, I walked into the classroom space, and it was in complete disarray. There's a long history about it. When I was put in this space, I was sure it was going to be, in the right conditions for what I needed to do that day, and it wasn't. And I blew a gasket. All right. It came on suddenly. I was pissed. I was swearing. I was kind of moving stuff around. And my students are trickling into this and watching me. I was so mad. I was crying. I was so pissed. And I was just, and they're all, trying to move things around and get it all. And it wasn't their fault, obviously. But I'm spouting out loud all these philosophical things, We always say that class comes first. Well, that's bullshit. Nobody is following that. And look at this. And, priorities are out of whack. And it was great because at one point I said, I'm really sorry. And this young woman goes, you don't need to be sorry. That I had a right to be mad, and they all got everything, we got everything back and we got our work done, and I thanked them. But it was fascinating is that because of that event, my emotions were on the surface. And even though I have Alba, and even though I can use Alba to modulate a bit if I choose to, and if I need to, my emotions are very close to the surface, and they can come out very quickly because I've eliminated over time all those physical barriers to them. So they're very accessible. So once I've opened that door, I am emotionally extremely available. So in that class that day, I was crying with passion and pride. Because I was talking to them about the showcase I had seen the night before up in Chicago. Our students had done the showcase, and I was so friggin' proud of them. And I was crying with this joy and pride over these kids. And then I was crying and angry because I was so mad that I was the only faculty member that was there other than the two who had put it together, and that really pissed me off. And so the whole class was me kind of with my emotions, my heart on my sleeve. And so I texted my TAs, my TAs for my two sections of that class. We're still in Chicago from the showcase. And I texted them and I said, you're probably going to hear something about class today. And sure enough, they did. But it was all good things that they heard. They heard that I was passionate, and how proud I was of them, and how much, I cared about the class and all of that. So it wasn't because it wasn't at them, it was at this situation in terms of the space. But yeah, so that's one of the downfalls of Alba, I suppose, is that, I will cry so easily at a sappy anything. The tears just come because they're just available to me. And, people say they go to a movie and they're the only one in the theater. They don't laugh. Well, not me. I was just in the theater the other day and I was the only one there. Oh, man, I am just checking, I am guffawing because I have no emotional filter sometimes when it comes up suddenly. Okay. When it's sneaking up on me, or when it starts at a small level, yes, but I can turn on a dime as well.
So both helps you modulate it, but also feel like it's both, right? So you can recognize it's coming and maybe you can redirect it, or sometimes it just bursts out. It is the hurricane is coming. It's coming. I can't redirect the
That's
hurricane.
right.
It's coming.
It comes before the warning sign goes off.
Or I see it coming, but there's not much I can do. It's coming. Here it comes.
Yeah, exactly.
You say downfall. That's interesting to me. Why would you say it's a downfall?
Which one?
That you start crying at a sappy, basically the emotional availability, I would say. It
Well,
sounded like you were saying that's somewhat of a downfall of it, or potential downfall of Alba.
Yeah. Okay. Well, because if I'm trying to remember the context in which I said it.
Because you're talking about the anger coming up so strongly in class, and then you were so passionate about the pride, and you were crying so much, like you just it flooded. It
was definitely a flood. I think maybe it's a downfall when it happens quickly, and I guess email is a good example. So, if I'm getting really, really angry, and I will do that email out, and I will sometimes not want to wait to have somebody else read it before I send it. It might be that kind of thing, because my emotions are so strong or so immediate when it's at a high level that I don't. I'm trying to still remember
sure.
yeah.
So I'm curious, okay, more from my side. As I've become more, let's call it emotionally available, or as the emotions flow through my body more quickly and more powerfully, I I seem to appreciate it and enjoy it, but it seems to cause conflict with people who want me to be less expressive. Can you please
Mm.
stop crying? Can you please stop being
Oh,
so
wow.
excited? Can you please stop
Okay.
being so angry? And it's not, it's almost sometimes, can you please take your feelings down to level 1?
Okay,
Stop being,
I guess
don't be at
maybe that
level 3,
is.
level 4, because of society. You're not supposed to be, depending on the culture, but most cultures say, hey, don't be at level 4, level 5 of any of this stuff.
I guess that is what I meant. I guess that is what I meant in terms of the reaction to it, or the person on the receiving end not expecting it or not being used to it, used to
Hmm.
somebody who's so available. Um, yeah, I think that's probably more what I meant by the downfall. But I've gotten to the point where I think I know that I'm not going to harm anyone when I get
Hmm.
emotionally strong. I know I am not going to say hurtful things, because that's just not part of who I am, I think. Um, but but others may perceive me. Okay, let me put it this way. So, me tearing up at things, people may misjudge how upset something is or how moved I am, because the tears come so easily that they think that was an overwhelming experience for me, or
Mm.
this issue is so integral to who I am as a person, because they wouldn't tear up at it, or they wouldn't expect somebody to tear up at that. Or
Mhm.
like my violent reaction to the room being out of shape. No one else, I don't think, would have reacted the way I reacted in that intensity, in that moment. And so I think it caught them off guard. I would
Mm.
never have directed that at a person. It was at a situation. And I think so it maybe was a bit unsettling for them initially. I didn't ask them. I should ask them.
Hmm.
But I think more of that, more of the receiver, that them interpreting it differently than I'm experiencing it, which is maybe your friend who's being interpreted one way when he's experiencing it in another way.
Hmm. I think there's the being misinterpreted on the type of emotion, if we want to call it that, but then also on the intensity of the emotion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think there's maybe not even misinterpretation, but then this negotiation of how intensely should we feel.
mm-hmm.
This is something I have struggled with a lot, because as I do this more, I feel more intensely, and I appreciate it until I bump up to somebody who tells me to
Okay.
stop feeling so intensely.
Yeah,
And I mean, this could describe many of my, not even just romantic relationships, but a lot of professional relationships too. And I think one of the reasons I struggle to go into corporate environments is that I think the emotional intensity is lower, or the expression of
absolutely.
emotional intensity is much lower.
I think that's exactly right. And that high emotion is looked down upon.
Yeah.
Crying in a corporate setting, you hear that all the time. It's in films all the time, that you shouldn't be crying at work. It's like, what the heck?
But you also shouldn't be too angry, and
Yeah,
you shouldn't be too happy or too proud
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
You definitely can't be too tender, because if you're too tender, now you're starting to form closer relationships in some way.
That's
I
right.
mean, even
Boundaries are
yeah,
being blurred, and yeah.
uh-huh. And then but you're the boss, and like there's it's
Yeah, so I guess we're now entering that neighborhood of the downfall part of it. Yeah, is that
Hmm.
it's not, is that availability is not always welcome. Yeah, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but that makes sense.
And culturally, it I think been passed on for many generations that we should feel less. There's almost, I talked about it on one of the Daily Gym episodes, this idea of a war between love and peace, where love in this
Mm,
concept is love, like feeling a lot. I feel so attached to you that I'm so excited to see you, that I'm very grateful to be around you. I'm very scared that you're going to leave. I'm very angry if someone's going to take you away
mhm,
from me.
mhm,
Like
mhm,
that, like very intense emotion. And then the idea of peace is almost the opposite, where it's more of this indifference, like I am
mm,
detached. I don't i don't get too angry. I don't want to feel the bad feelings, so I don't feel anger, I don't feel sadness, but I also don't feel too much joy. I don't feel too much. So kind of I think Brene Brown called it this idea that we could have a selective numbing, and
mhm.
that we can't really selectively numb. We just kind of bring the intense. It's hard to be a person who is very filled with joy, but not also express intense anger either. I don't know. I'm curious what you
Yeah.
think about that. It's just like, do you see kind of a, a connection between kind of the levels of intensity that people are willing to express? Or
Oh, absolutely. Well, like it goes back to what I was saying before, is that you're born without the filter, and we learn a
mm,
filter. We learn filters,
mm,
and we learn a certain filter for corporate. We learn a certain filter in our family. We learn a different filter wherever, and we've learned those, and our body has memorized them. And I guess I'm just kind of processing this right now, but what that volatility that I'm describing and that
mm-hmm,
I feel in myself is the baby, you
mm-hmm,
know, who doesn't doesn't have the filter yet. And so that particular day, I was the baby, that my filter was gone. And so I was crying, and then I was laughing, and then I was throwing things, and I was swearing, I was all over the map, because I have, through Alba, I think, it might not all be Alba, but through Alba, those filters, those physical filters that I had put into my body over time have been removed. Now that's not that, here's the downfall. That's not always a good thing. I mean, we learn to control our emotions because we can't act like babies all the time, right?
mm,
We can't wear our hearts on our sleeves all the time, because then people have to take care of us all the time. That's why we use emotion as babies, because that's how we communicate. But we now have other
mm.
tools to use. We have more than our emotions to use to communicate. And maybe that's something to think about for yourself too, is there a better way than through my emotions to communicate this issue? Because this person is clearly not responding to the emotion, or it makes them uncomfortable, or it makes them afraid. I have to listen to where they are too, and their emotional state. If my emotions are frightening them for whatever reason, or making them angry because of who they are and where they are, then I got to think of a different approach. I need to use a different language, not just my emotional language, but a different language. It's not the only one I have. And I guess that's one thing about Alba, is suddenly you feel, oh my God, I understand so much. Well, you understand something really well, but there's still this other whole part of communication that's not emotion.
This is why I struggle sometimes, because I think with my background, intercultural communication, and just in general, I liked going to places. I liked being the chameleon and blending in and adapting to so many other ways of how people were being, speaking, interacting, etc. And there's a part of me now that sees culture not so static and more dynamic, and that culture gets pulled in different directions,
Of
and because
course.
culture is just behavior, right? And is, well, a big part of its behavior. And um going, well, how, what if I stand up against culture? Why do I, what's the negotiation? How much am I compromising towards what other people want versus hoping that they come
Well,
towards
it
my
depends on
direction?
what
It's
your
tricky.
goal is. It depends on what your goal is.
Hmm.
I mean, if your goal is to change other people, is your goal just to interact and everybody? It depends on what you're after.
Well, so I think before I had often talked about connection with another human, But I did this trip to South Africa, and I had a beautiful time in South Africa. I saw a Dave Matthews concert. Oh my gosh, I was so happy. And I was trying to explain to a guy there. He says, "What do you do for work?" I said, "Oh, I teach people how to love or something." And because I was there to learn about Mandela as well, and then I thought more about Mandela, and I said, this man was in prison for a long time, and he came out, yes, loving other humans, but he also loved life. And I thought, oh, it's about loving life and just feeling connected to what's really going on in life. And I thought sometimes when people will culture or people will say stop feeling so much, it's if I'm just excited to see a squirrel, they're like, stop being so excited to see a squirrel. I'm like, they don't say it in those words, but they say, life sucks, why are you so excited? It's like, I think we have a tendency to close off and kind of and disconnect and numb these emotions and kind of mute them in a way where to blend in and to harmonize with other people, it means I have to do that, not just with them, but kind of in life. Because just taking an Alba class, it doesn't restrict it. Okay, I'm in Alba class and now I'm feeling a lot, and now the emotions come up very quickly for me. You leave and it's like, oop, the emotions are still coming.
Still coming up. Yeah, exactly.
And maybe even stronger in some ways.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa, what is going on?
Exactly. Well, and the world's not necessarily ready for all of us to just start emoting all over the place. So we have to adapt. I mean, I think that you can help people come along on your journey, but it's not your job to. It's not necessarily your place to. I think there's a negotiation.
It's a negotiation, yeah.
Yeah, to figure out, okay, I'm different now. How do I fit into the world? Not the world needs to fit in with the new me, but how do
both.
Both, yeah, both. That's what negotiation is, right? Yeah, both, yeah.
And not just, and not kind of, the world in general, but also one-on-one relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
With family and friends. And because learning something like this, I'd say not downfall, but one of the risks is that I think we have somewhat of an equilibrium in our emotional lives with people. And then to go, whoop, I'm much more emotionally available, can really disrupt some of that equilibrium and cause some unexpected conflict
absolutely, because as your emotions change, their emotional reactions to you change. So you're not the only one changing. They're changing because you've changed. So
but they didn't sign up for class.
They didn't sign up. Exactly. Exactly. So you're taking them along on your ride almost without their permission. Not that they need permission. You need permission.
But the other thing is that, so I think Alba is one of the classes and one of the, I think people get this through therapy and some other, obviously there are many modalities to becoming more emotionally available or whatnot. I think when we become less available, when we start closing off, we also take people with us, whether they want to be taken or not. Exactly. The person who loses their job and now becomes depressed and starts smoking a lot of weed or something, that can pull us down too. In terms, not in terms of feeling sad,
Absolutely.
maybe, again, it's not about the flavor of emotion or type, but more of the expressiveness.
Absolutely. Well, we're hardwired that way. It goes back to our conversation earlier, is that we're hardwired to connect with each other and to have emotional, empathetic responses. We wouldn't survive as a species if we didn't, because we're communicating, with our emotional works. We have emotional instruments and emotional communication. That's, 50% of how we communicate. And so it's natural that people are going to change as you change.
Because we're connected whether we want to be or not.
Exactly. You got it. Exactly.
And so I've recently started thinking of this concept. It's, in a way, we may see it as almost like a tug of war. Like some people are going toward, like if we go more towards emotional expressiveness, we are maybe pulling people to be more emotionally expressive than they want to, whether we want to pull them or not.
Or sometimes, we're doing the opposite. We're getting more, and it's making them pull away from you because it's scaring them.
Yeah, because they pull on the rope even harder because I don't want to go in that direction.
Exactly.
Why are you getting so excited? Why are you falling in love with me? I don't want to fall in love. Don't fall in love with me. And then that react. But yeah, and then so do we come back? How do we do that dance? If we let go of the rope, what happens? You know?
Exactly.
And how, and just culturally, who maybe not out of their intention, but because of their circumstance, is on the other end of the rope, pulling in the other direction? Who's telling us, nobody cares about you, life sucks, just give up, stop feeling, you shouldn't be so excited, you shouldn't be sad, you shouldn't be angry, just move on. Kind of a lot of suppression,
Hmm. Hmm.
really.
Yeah.
Um, but for those of us who are excited about, or at least, some percentage excited about feeling more, um, Alba can be really intense.
Yes, indeed.
And I think I love it about it because I see it similar if someone were to do Krav Maga or CrossFit. CrossFit. Wow, that accent was off. CrossFit. um, in wanting to do the intensity. How have what have you noticed in students in terms of their uh, either surprise or delight or their emotional reaction to the intensity?
They are surprised. They are always surprised. But um, I guess we'd have to go back a step and say, what do you mean by emotional intensity? Or what do I mean by emotional
Sure.
intensity? It is a very emotional experience, but again, it's emotion without context.
Mm.
So people, before they come in the class, have this image that they're going to be talking about all of these emotional memories and all of their relationships, and they're going to be purging all of this stuff, and they're going to feel this horrible, resurgence of pain. But it's not that at all, because it's just physiological. We don't do any of that. We don't talk about their past. We don't talk about relationships. We don't talk about any of that because it's totally physical. So it's intense, but in a different way from what they expect, because they expect they're going to be having flashbacks and they're going to be going through all of this past trauma, and they're not doing that at all. So they are surprised that they can have these intense emotional experiences without the context. And you mentioned that at the very beginning of our conversation, is that it can be quite disconcerting the first time it happens, when we call it an induction, when the patterns that I teach trigger an intense emotional experience, but it has no context. And so the most common one that kind of astounds people because it's so visceral and so visual is when a person will have a deep induction of sadness, and there will be just this sobbing, and tears, and just, appears to be out of control, crying and sadness. And I'll often have other students kind of observing this experience because it's an educational moment. And so then I am guiding them back out physically, out of the pattern and back into neutral. And there's an exercise that we do that helps them to get to neutral, which you're aware of. Get them back to neutral. And then, the other students are in the class. Usually the first time it happens, they're worried. They have this emotional response of compassion and concern for this person who appears to be experiencing, this very unpleasant, painful journey. And so they're all just kind of on the edge of their seats, worried. And I'll say, so how was that? And the response is things like, that was amazing. Or, oh my God, that was so cool. Or, God, that was bizarre. And I'll say, in what way? And they said, I was so sad about nothing. And so, and that disconnect, to feel that sadness and this crying and a feeling that they can't get out of it, but still safe in it. And then at that stage of the learning, of course, I'm there to keep it safe and to get them out of it. But then gradually they learn how to turn it off and turn it on themselves. But that's what's so powerful about this, is that you can go to this extreme emotional place, but without the context and without the lingering sadness. So after the neutral, I said, are you feeling any sad? I mean, it'll be 1 minute, 2 minutes later, and I'll say, are you feeling any residue of the sadness? Sometimes they are, because it's hanging on in the body. And then I just need to do more work with them physically to release. Sometimes the eyes are not quite right, or they're still too relaxed, or whatever it is that there's in the body that they're not completely out of it. But if they have done the process correctly to get out of it, they'll say, no, I'm fine. And certainly by the end of the course, invariably afterwards, it's, oh, no, I'm fine, because they have learned the control, and they learn when they're hanging on to some of it.
So in a way, you'd say it helps people practice feeling the intensity and learning how to come back from that intensity?
Yes.
In Alba specifically, in acting, right? But
Yep.
also that applies towards their lives, I would assume, that when not as much, because then obviously context is mixed in, and maybe it's harder to get out of, because the context can reinforce and deepen the sadness or whatnot, but still help them not have a huge reaction to the huge reaction, if that makes sense.
That's absolutely correct. And the process that we use to help a student get back to neutral, we call it the step out, and it's a physiological process that helps them change the components of a pattern and bring them back to neutral. So they ask me, can I use the step out in life? And I'll say, well, sure, you can use it, but it's not going to do the same thing as it does in class. So in class, the step out is designed to bring you to neutral. In life, it's not going to bring you to neutral, because your emotion has context. But what it may do and will do is help to neutralize you. It can help to calm the emotion a bit, so that then you can make some choices about how you're going to act on it. So I could have, when I was having my rage in the Phoenix Theater a couple of weeks ago, I could have chosen to go outside, to do a step out, to calm me a bit, and I would still be angry because the situation had not changed. But I would be in more control of that anger. It would be at a lower level. I chose not to, because I was mad, and there was no reason for me not to be mad. Yeah. Okay. And the students were not upset. It was not disrupting class. In some ways, it ultimately fed class in a positive way, but I could have used the step out to neutralize. And so one of the greatest benefits that students have come back to me dozens of times is telling me that this work has helped their anxiety, because they have learned to neutralize the anxiety to a level that is manageable. So it doesn't go away necessarily completely, but it doesn't escalate to a panic attack. That they can, I've had many, many students that they've never had a panic attack since, because they are able to recognize it coming sooner, and then they can use some of the physical aspects of tenderness, as it turns out, are the ones that I have worked to neutralize anxiety the most. And if they put a little bit of the tenderness pattern into their anxiety that they're experiencing, it doesn't go then. It doesn't escalate, and they can calm down.
So if people have a context that they are afraid of tenderness, that might create a lot of anxiety, because the tenderness helps to neutralize the anxiety.
Well, I would not give them. I would not give them that advice until I knew that they had good control of tenderness. I don't tell them that on the first day.
I'm just thinking more kind of as a person, thinking of how tenderness can be so demonized, frankly, in society sometimes, that maybe that's often why, like me, maybe that's why I have more anxiety when I'm trying to withhold the tenderness and suppress it.
Well, anytime you're trying to withhold, anytime you're withholding something, you're going to have some fear in there.
Yeah. I think what also came up for me was that I think this helps people navigate the intense emotions in them. But what you also talked about was the other students in the room watching somebody in intense sadness and to negotiate that and to
Hmm.
balance and manage that. I think so often in life, we can feel very afraid that we are going to cause such extreme emotion in somebody else. And if someone is feeling that extreme emotion, I think we could easily say, oh, it's because of me. It's because of what I did.
Hmm.
They're feeling angry because I made them really angry. They're not telling me what's going on. They must be really angry at me
Right,
because
right.
otherwise they would tell me. So it's my fault.
Mm.
And what I think helped me in Alba was sitting there going, this person is really crying. And they're not crying because they're thinking about what I did. They're not
Mm.
thinking about anything. And it can help to break the connection between this is the physiological response and this is the certain cognitive thing that's going through their mind. Because in
Right.
real life, it can be a different context. They're crying because of
Absolutely.
what I did. No, they're crying.
Right.
Why, what are they thinking about? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. You don't know
I
what
don't know.
where you don't know where they came from and what state they were in before you had this interaction.
Hmm.
If they were already coming in vulnerable and then you said something fairly mundane, it still can trigger something that you think is your fault when it actually is the last interaction, not you.
And that's what I try to remind myself is, okay, if they're feeling the strong reaction, maybe 5% of what I did caused it, maybe 50%. I don't know how much I'm
Right, exactly.
contributing to the emotional reaction. Um,
True.
and that helps me feel a lot more calm. Okay. It's not just stop beating myself up. Um,
Right.
what, okay, so I know that you want to expand your teaching in Alba. Are there particular areas that you'd like to get into or particular groups of people that you'd like to work with more than others? Or
Well, I would like to expand on what I've already tasted, but the problem is that frozen on my end. Am I frozen on your end?
you are slightly frozen. You're doing a little pixelated dance.
A little dance. Okay.
You're back. You're back.
Yeah, you're
So
doing the
just
same with me. Well, I'll just keep on
it's
talking and hopefully
it's
it's
recording.
recording.
So what we're
Um,
seeing is different than the recording. The recording is happening locally on your computer, I think, and is being uploaded. So afterwards, maybe if we need to fix it, we can. So keep going.
okay. Well, just so that you know, sometimes you're breaking up, so I might not hear everything that you say. So, um, so in terms of areas that I want to expand, areas has two connotations here. I want to expand geographically, but I also want to expand in terms of the the category of person that I want to reach beyond actors. So I have in the last 20 years or so worked actors, probably 90% actors, if not more. But I have also taught attorneys, a judge, a yoga teacher, a midwife, um, someone going through recovery from addiction and took it to support that journey, um, nurses, caretakers, and all of them have spoken to me about how much it's helped their work and helped their just existence. And that's where I feel the greatest benefit. And even the actors that I've worked with, many of them say, yes, it's been great for my acting, but it's what it's done for my personal life that really resonates. So even though they're actors, they're still gaining what I hope to give everyone in terms of that self-awareness and the ability to communicate differently with others because of the knowledge. So in areas, I want to go in that direction. But again, there's resistance in the United States to concepts of emotional training a bit. Um, and then also I want to expand geographically because there are not very many of us internationally that are trained to teach this. And So I teach here in Illinois. I'm going next weekend to teach a weekend intensive in California. I teach at a school once a year in Fredonia, New York. But most of my students, the vast majority of my students right now are in the Netherlands, interestingly enough. So I have hundreds of people that I've taught in the Netherlands, and it's just fate that happened. And I'm trying to expand geographically just so that there's more availability for the work, because it's very hard to find an Alba course in the States. It's very hard because we are all spread out and there aren't very many of us. So that's my goal as I enter retirement is to expand geographically and in terms of who comes to take a course.
In terms of teaching people, but also teaching people to teach, right?
Yeah, and that's one reason. Yeah, exactly. And that's one reason I want to expand geographically is to get more teachers available. So in the Netherlands, for example, I have 2 people who I've trained to be teachers that I mentioned earlier. But they're still being, they're still under my mentorship because it takes a long time to get the skills. And I've got probably 3 or 4 more in the Netherlands who are on the teaching track. So I'm not worried about the Netherlands. They're going to be fine. It's become one of the biggest Alba hubs in the world. But here I finished Anne's training and studied with another very good teacher before she came to me. So she is there. I've got one that I trained who's in Chicago, but she is less interested in teaching it than just using it in her life. So that's not the person that I'm teaching for in California is very eager to become a teacher. So if I see that the potential for that in her, then hopefully I'll be returning to that area so that I can train her and get some more people going. Yeah, that's absolutely what I want to do. But you have to get to a place and you have to get a lot of classes and a lot of hours in that place in order for the person to become certified to teach. Because it's not you take a class and then you can go teach it. It takes longer than that. So yeah, so that's the challenge.
I was just thinking about people or groups of people this may resonate more quickly with or more initially with. And I think, so from my conversation with Mary the other day, we talked about academia and how sometimes academia in some spaces can feel so much in the head, almost disembodied. And that I think if people are in spaces where they're often looking at life from a more cognitive perspective, looking with words or staying, focusing on that side of things, they may be really uncomfortable being in their body. And Alba can be a very intense being in the body. I mean, it's in the body.
Absolutely.
And so part of me wonders if people who are already in their body or focus much more on being in their body than being in their head, if we're going to make some distinction like that, would, what's the word? Not grasp on, like come into it more naturally. Be more receptive to it. So I'm thinking of dancers, martial artists, physical therapists, or chiropractors, or something more on the physical expression rather than the.
One would think, think, and you could. I think once they get into the class, maybe. But getting them into the class is the challenge because a physical therapist says, what do I need to know about emotion? I'm working with shoulders, or what is to me, it makes complete sense. And, I've had a couple of students one who became a speech pathologist, and, one, I can't remember what that person's field is, but also something that you wouldn't think is going to be directly related. And she's come back to me and said, I use it every day. I never thought I would, but I use it every day. But going into it, a physical therapist says, how's that going to help me work on this person's knee? It makes sense to you and I because we've been through the course and we see how it's impacted our work. But getting them to take a course is a whole other thing, particularly since people think until they get into it that this is going to be this big emotional thing and I'm going to be so vulnerable and I'm going to be sharing all this stuff, those misconceptions about what the
Cognitively
class is.
vulnerable, like my contexts, my stories, my experience. But that
or,
idea,
or,
yeah,
emotion, or emotionally vulnerable. They
yeah,
don't, they want to work in their field. They don't want to, they're afraid of the class the same as actors are afraid of the class because they think it's going to be dumping my emotional baggage and they think, how's that going to help my practice?
aha, emotional. But okay, so they may not see it as being as physically oriented as it
No,
actually
they
is.
still see it physical, but
Yeah.
it's the emotion word that's the scary word,
That's the
not the
word.
physical word. It's the
Ah,
idea of working on emotions seems
uh-huh.
irrelevant and scary. So those two things, they'll use irrelevant as their reason for not doing it often, when
Uh-huh.
it's really that they're scared of it. And for many people, it's both those things. It's not relevant to me, is what they'll say, but they may see that it's irrelevant and that it's scary because I don't want to be vulnerable with a bunch of people that I don't know, which I get.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I
Oh
get,
yeah.
I don't want to go into a room full of people I don't know and especially they don't know me. They don't know the technique. If emotions are not handled in a classroom well, it can be awful and it can be traumatic.
Mm.
And to just hand over, my body to somebody who says, I'm going to teach your emotional availability and they don't know what I'm going to do, I wouldn't take that class either. So it's building, so much of this work is word of mouth, is
Mm.
that, and that's why it's gone the way it has in the Netherlands is, the way that happened is because people might say, well, why don't you just do what you did in the Netherlands in LA? I mean, why can't you follow the same model? And this is why you can't follow the same model. The way I ended up in the Netherlands, it was probably 6 years ago. No, more like 8 years ago. God, I can't believe it's been that long, but COVID kind of interrupted
COVID,
the
yeah.
journey. So I got an email from an actress, Jacqueline. I don't want to mention her name without her permission, but her full name. But she reached out to me on email that she was an experienced actor and had run into a place in her career where she was coming up against her own resistance to letting emotions come out. She needed a new way to access them consistently. And she'd been doing a lot of reading to figure out if there was something she could work with. And she had found a chapter in a book, I think it was, or a book on voice for the actor. And the person who had written it mentions in the book a section on Alba, and he was an Alba teacher. He was the first one that Anne studied from. And she reached out to him to see if he was offering any courses. And he said, no, I've got nothing going on right now. I don't think our schedules are going to match, but I suggest you reach out to Nancy Loitz. She's a really good teacher. I think that might be a good fit. See if she's available. So she reached out to me. We did a Skype call. That was pre-Zoom, right? Pre-COVID. And we met on Skype. I still remember that conversation. And by the end of that conversation, we knew that we clicked and she was interested in the work. So she said, well, why don't I just come over and work with you? And I said, that'd be great. So she came over and she stayed for about 10 days and we did some individual work. I brought in students that I had here that I'd already taught Alba to, and they got some kind of free sessions because they'd come in and join her. Tom, my colleague Tom, joined, and she just loved it. Just it resonated with her the way it did with me when I first learned it. And so 2 days after she flew back, I get a call from Amsterdam. She's talked to her friend of hers that runs the acting school at the academy in Amsterdam, and we need to get you over here. So I went over the next summer and taught in the academy and taught a professional class. And then each year I've gone back, it's just growing and growing and growing and growing. And the reason it's growing is because of Jacqueline. Jacqueline is a very well-known actress in Amsterdam. Or in all of the Netherlands. She is highly respected. She works with a lot of people. And if Jacqueline says this is something you should do, you do it. And then as I taught more people in the Netherlands, more actors at her tier, it just spread like absolute wildfire. And now most actors in the Netherlands know what it is and seek it out, either from me or from the two people that are now starting to teach there. And without that door, it doesn't happen. It's and that's kind of what happened with Anne too. You know, Anne reached out to her agent in Detroit, and he spoke to his clients, you know, his actors, saying, this is something that I want you to do, you should do. And suddenly I was there 3 years in a row, full classes, because there's that one person that they already value and admire and trust who says you should do this. And until you get that, it's beating your head against the wall. And that's what it's been for 25 years. And I'm still beating my head against the wall. I mean, I generally lose money teaching this. If I were to look across the 30 years I've done this, I have lost more money than I have made. But I continue to do it because I know of its value, and because I don't want it to die when my generation of teachers are no longer teaching. And that's what I fear happening. And that's why I'm trying to get teachers in place. It's not going to die in the Netherlands because it's now become so much a part of the training, because it's being taught now in several schools there by the people I have trained. But there are right now, I think, I teach it here through May at this university. Someone teaches it at a school in Texas. Somebody teaches it in Idaho at a school. Someone teaches it in Alaska at a university, and that's it. No other universities have a staff member that teach Alba regularly.
Wow.
As hard as I have tried. And then when I retire from here, we could lose it here as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying this, because I think sometimes my mind goes into, well, if we just find the right people and this and this. And honestly, one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is because I struggled to run classes, because I would post things and people just didn't have any response to it. I'm like, people don't want to come to this. This stuff is powerful.
Exactly.
But what I realized is that when I have successfully run, like when I ran emotional self-defense classes, they were often on projects, trainings I was doing in Germany, where it would be a 10-day training. 45 of us would live in the same house for 10 days. They would get to know me, and they're like, oh, you're running a workshop? I'll show up. They didn't know what it was about. And afterwards, honestly, like one of my favorite testimonials was this one girl said, Jim, your workshop, it fucked my feelings, but they needed it. Thank you. Like, yes. But that level of trust was
that's
built
the
in.
Key. Trust.
And
that's exactly right. Because I wouldn't trust anybody to mess with my
I came
emotions
because of
Anne,
and I was terrified.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was like, but I've known Anne for many, many years, and I thought, okay, Anne, I admire and respect many things about Anne and trust her opinion on many things. And so I said, let's do this.
So exactly. So remember that terror you felt? That's what I'm talking about, that physical therapist, right? That physical therapist feels that terror, and he's not hearing it from a friend, physical therapist, who said it was mind-changing. He's hearing from Nancy Loitz, this retired acting teacher from Bloomington, Illinois. He's going to say, what? Who the heck, you know?
And something that's inspired me, and like I said, this is one of the main reasons for the podcast. How do I get more people to know me, trust me enough that they say, okay, I'll take a risk on trying something like this? Because I haven't been broadcasting before. I haven't been posting a lot on the internet. So a lot of public people don't know who I am.
Right.
public people. A lot of people outside of, one-on-one relationships don't really know who I am. And so how can I'd say build a relationship, but more than anything, let people know me on a deeper level, see me on a deeper level so that they could build some trust in that. But also let people see someone like you on an episode like this so that
Yeah,
they can
exactly.
understand Nancy is not this this person that's going to destroy me in class. This is someone who is very careful about how she does things, but also very expressive. So it's that
Mhm.
balance of being a very aware and expressive, and maybe that can help people feel more comfortable going into a class.
Yeah.
I think of, the inspiration was Bruce Lee. I believe his model was, hey, I want to be a really famous martial artist actor. I want to be a huge Hollywood star. And then he also taught one-on-one classes to people,
Mm-hmm.
to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and a couple other famous people in LA. But if he weren't a famous actor, who would necessarily trust him to lead them through that process?
Exactly. Exactly. So
And
that's
so,
the dilemma. That's the dilemma. I mean, the judge that I taught, when I taught him, actually, he wasn't a judge. He was a prosecutor. He was the lead prosecutor. And he took the class and loved it. And he was planning to require his entire prosecutorial team to take a course. I thought, great, I've opened up into a whole new thing. Well, 2 weeks after class concluded, he calls me and he says, I've got another interview to be a judge. And he had been declined, and he'd gotten to that place 6 times before, I think, or 5 times before. And he was being invited again. He'd made that again to interview to be a judge. And he said, can we get together? Can we review my patterns? Can we do a step out to help with my nerves and things like that? And so then he interviewed and he got it. And he believes that part of it had to do with that emotional availability, because, I could tell you that story another day. But because he was then a judge, he could no longer promote the course because they have to be unbiased.
yeah.
So he wasn't allowed to talk about it at all anymore. So that cut off that whole potential on that venue. I mean, there's so many populations I would love to get into. We brainstormed a lot as Alba people about getting into law enforcement and working on de-escalation and working on how to communicate, with people in stressful circumstances. And, it was during the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, we thought how important this would be to try and get it into groups and into authority figures in terms of how can I use tenderness to de-escalate. Great idea. How do you talk, a police force into a workshop on your emotions? I mean, it makes sense to you and me because we understand its value, but to somebody else, it's not so cut and dry.
I was thinking maybe you need to start your own podcast, Nancy.
But then
No, but just I think one of the things that's hard with Alba and some of the emotional self-defense, or what I've taught, is that it's hard to teach it online. It's because it's so physical that we want to there's huge risks to try to teach it online. So it's much safer to teach it in person.
Well, there are some people who do teach Alba online. I refuse to. I will not.
There's so much with the physical communication. We're using video here, but there's not. I mean, there's so much.
There's so much. I mean,
so much in terms of safety. And
I need to see the whole body. I need to be able to hear the breath. What happens if I get somebody into a deep induction and our internet goes out? And I'm not there to walk them back through. How do I know that you're in a safe environment? How do I not know that you have a partner in the other room who is not a safe person?
Yeah.
It's just, there are too many reasons. I absolutely will not teach beginners online. I'll do a refresher with somebody who's an advanced student, but I am adamantly opposed to it, despite the fact that some of my colleagues do it.
And so then how are ways for people to trust you enough that you could lead that, or anyone else who is teaching Alba can lead that in a private context
Yeah.
without them seeing it before. It's like, how do I trust that the food is good before I have tasted it? Well, because you know the person, you've heard them talk about food, and you're like, wow, this person really knows their food.
Right.
Like,
Right.
they know a lot about food, and other people say that the food was really good, so let me try it.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, so I'm really grateful that you would come on and talk about it more, just because I believe so much, not only in the work that Alba is, but in you teaching it. I
Appreciate
have
that.
taken many, many workshops and been a trainer on many different projects. And Nancy, I believe, does this very well. Really, I think your ability to structure a class, but also be free flowing, and also go where it's leading. Yeah, like go where it's leading, but hit the points that you want to hit. I think it shows to me that you have an expertise of the material. And expertise is, you're always learning. You're curious to learn. You're not stuck in, this is what I'm teaching and this is how it is. It's, ooh, what did I learn today? Let's try this. There's a playfulness and a curiosity to it. Um, but also that, again, that caution, that protectiveness in a way. You're not trying to hurt people, but you're also trying to play. It's that balance that I find hard to find in classes.
I appreciate that, and I strive for that kind of mixture. So I'm glad to hear that you perceived some of that in your experience.
It's very active. Nancy is not, there's no PowerPoint presentations. You're not sitting around.
No.
Nancy is moving. Nancy is going. If you've noticed on the video call, she's doing this a lot and she's bouncing around.
Uh-oh.
I'm okay with it because this is real, and I don't
Yeah.
want people who are just sitting here like this. I mean, this emotions tend to make us move and express with our hands and our
Well,
body.
like I said, vacation to me is not lying on the beach. So
And so I appreciate it because, as someone, especially who grew up playing a lot of sports, I have that energy as well. I don't like just sitting still. I like moving. I like doing. I like exploring. And class was intense, but as I talked about on the daily gym the other day, almost this like grateful exhaustion. I felt gratefully exhausted after going through a lot of Alba training.
yeah, it's intense, but it's fun. I think
Yeah.
that's one thing when I talk about joy in class, when I introduce joy, is that as far as I'm concerned, every successful working environment has a lot of laughter in it. And
Hmm.
if you aren't laughing in rehearsal, there's something wrong. Even if you're doing a tragedy, there better be some laughter in there, because laughter is a bonding, it's glue, that brings us together as a community. And if you're not laughing, then I'm wondering how much work you're getting done. So
Hmm. Wow. Wow. What if American culture changed and laughter was more important than being serious?
yeah. Well,
For
they're both
productivity.
serious. They're
I
both
know.
serious.
What
Yeah.
serious, which tends to
Yeah.
be an expression of, I don't know, neutral, low level anger. I don't know what.
Right. Right.
We can negotiate over those words another time. Oh, yeah. I think, yeah, that's what I liked about that testimonial that girl gave me. Yeah, Jim, it fucked my feelings, but they needed it. Thank you. Because it
Yeah.
said that
Yeah.
really
Exactly.
intense, but it was fun in this
Yeah.
weird way. Like I didn't expect it to be. Why was it so fun? Why was bawling on the floor in a fetal position fun? Like,
Exactly. And you
huh?
can't explain it until you've experienced it.
Yeah.
That's.
And what I appreciate is that you want to go to the intensity, but when you're teaching, you are very mindful of who has blockages, who has fear of going too intense in this direction. You're very aware of the room and individuals at the same time.
And that's why training trainers takes so much time. Is People ask, how long does it take to become a teacher? How many hours do I need to become a teacher? And I said, I cannot tell you that,
Mm,
because everyone takes their own time, and not everyone is going to be an Alba teacher, a good Alba teacher. And I will not put somebody on the teaching track that I don't believe has the potential to and the ability to keep people safe at the same time that they are moving people through the pattern. So It takes a long time to train somebody to become a trainer. And again, the reason I have so many students in Amsterdam is because I've been brought back every year. So these people are working with me every year over time, intensely working with me. If I go to Fredonia, New York, for example, where I teach an intensive once a year, I get these students once and then they graduate and they're gone. Then the next year I get another group and they take one course and they're gone. They don't become teachers. They have to have repeated courses. So like California, I'm going over to do a one-off, but these are students that are at a college. They're going to graduate. They're going to be gone. Now their teacher, as I said, hopes to become a teacher, and I'll see if she will. I anticipate that she will because she is already a very good teacher. I know her, a teacher of other things. But because she wants to become a teacher, the potential is that she'll keep having me out. We can start to generate a group in the LA area, and then we could get a hub there. But that's what I need I need to keep returning to the same place, like I was in Detroit for a while, to get a base and then let it grow from there. But it's challenging.
I think we often talked about how fun it can be for the students, but I think you've mentioned it's very fun.
Oh, it's very fun.
and learning for you, right? There's a lot of learning. It's
Absolutely.
fun. It's intense. So again, that kind of exhaustion. You probably feel tired after some of these classes, right?
Yeah. It's very tiring to teach. It's because it is so physical and because it requires such keen attention on my part. Because if I have a class of 14, which is my maximum number, and people are working on patterns on their own individually, I have to be tuned into all 14 of them and be able to navigate, how do I give this person the attention they need right now at the risk of losing an opportunity to this other person over here who's just on the brink of learning something. But if I'm over here, I'm going to miss that. And so that is, you need that key, that's exhausting. That piece of it is more exhausting to me than the physical aspect of it, is the attention.
In my mind, it's almost as if as a teacher, you're training adults to be more like kids and then having to deal with lots of kids at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, this person's crying, this person's angry, this person's like, oh God, oh no, I just created a daycare. What happened? Most of us are trying to go the opposite direction, and you're like, hey, let me create this class where everyone's here. No, it's not that wild. It's not that chaotic.
It's not chaotic at all.
I think for me, it's the joy of the challenge. It's like I haven't taught Alba, but when I was teaching emotional self-defense, it feels very similar in a way where I'm having people do an exercise of rejection. So they're rejecting each other in partners.
Oh, rejected. I have to add that to my mixed emotion list.
Oh yeah. And so exactly. And so what I basically say is, partner A, think of something you need help with, go up to partner B, ask for help. Partner B, or tell them what you're struggling with, ask for help. Partner B, say no and make it hurt. And partner A, respond with 3 steps: truth, fair play, love. Truth, tell the truth about how you actually feel. Because most of the time we don't do this and people don't pay attention to it because they know we're hiding something. Step 2, tell the other person how you imagine they might be feeling, not how you know they're feeling. Like, again, it could be super open-ended, as we talked about earlier. Like, I think you're feeling something. I don't know what it is. You're human. Or it can be maybe you're angry or upset, or who knows. And then step 3 is to say one thing to connect with love. I care about you. Thank you. And it's not about getting it right. It's about practicing. It's about practicing basically those first 2 steps, because if we do those 2 well, we tend to do the third one pretty easily. And then I let people go do it. I mean, before we do some practice on the drill and those steps so they get some familiarity with them. But then I just say, okay, go. And to be monitoring maybe 5 or 10 different groups of people around me. Okay, these people, like I did it once in Romania, and my friend who coordinated the whole workshop, her parents were there. And everyone was rejecting each other in Romanian. And I'm sitting here going,
oh, that's challenging too. And it's a
so
language.
Alba would have helped a lot because I didn't know what they were saying. So I was looking at their posture and their facial expression. And, one person was, I think the mother was leaning in and pointing a lot. And then the father was leaning out and kind of turned his head. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, let me monitor this and see what's happening and try to dance and ask, okay, how's it going? And maybe interject, but really just monitor the flow of emotions and the emotional dynamics in the room. And I love doing that. And I also think, a lot of people would be terrified to do this.
Exactly.
They're afraid to do it by themselves, let alone manage all these other people going through this process. But for those who are excited to try it, there aren't that many opportunities to run workshops like this. That's what Alba, I was like, wow, Alba is one of the closest parallels to what I've been teaching in terms of that emotional management of a space.
Yeah, the goals behind it. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And the feel or the
energy in the room.
The energy in the room. Exactly. Yeah. Where there's a lot of emotional intensity in the room. And I put it there, I intentionally led people into this process, and now it's getting intense. How do I manage it so that we can do this safely, but also play with our limits?
Right.
Yeah. So if you liked any class that I took, you may also really appreciate Alba. Really, it's, and I'm grateful that you're out there helping people explore emotional limits on the extreme end, like on the high intensity, but also low intensity, and really dancing between that, because we explore those limits unintentionally in life all the time. So to have a container where people are consciously intending to explore these limits, I think can be not only much safer, but also more fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, Nancy, I miss you, and I am really glad you came on the show. Is there anything that you want to talk about still remaining? Or?
I think the one thing that we haven't hit on for those people who might be interested in pursuing Alba is what a pattern is.
Sure.
We keep referring to the patterns. Well, what does that mean? And
so a side note on that first is that by doing Alba, because some of these things are so simple, some of the way it's described is so simple, I think we can integrate it into our language very quickly. And we're just like, oh, this is the concept. This is the concept.
Right,
so
right.
I appreciate you saying that, so we can pull back a little bit so people.
Yeah. I think I'll just mention a little bit. So if anybody does decide they want a class, or they want to explain to somebody what this podcast was about, is that each pattern, neutral, and each of the 6 basics, we work on 3 different components. The breath, which is really the spine of the work. The breath is key. So we're working on the breath. Secondly, we're working on the posture or the muscle tone. And third, we're working on the facial expression. And each of those components has 2 subcomponents, at least the way I teach it. That's the vocabulary I've broken it down to. In that the breath has both what's happening in terms of whether it's coming in through the mouth or the nose, what's the rhythm that's happening here, and then also where in our breathing mechanism does it live? Does it live up here in the chest? Does it live down here in the belly? Is it here in the ribs? Because each pattern lives in a different place in that way. And then the facial expression has 2 components as well. It's the musculature of the face. It's got a smile, or it's got a frown, or it's got tension here. And what's happening with the eyes. And the eyes are of critical importance. So although there's 3 basic components, there's really 6 categories of things that we're working on. And each one of those categories has a great deal of detail. So the eyes, we're working with all of the muscles that are under here. We're working with here. We're working on what you're looking at. I mean, and what are here? What is our tongue doing? What is, so it's very, very intricate. It's very technical. It's very precise.
I think I was maybe afraid to talk about it because I don't know just from my standpoint, how much you wanted to share publicly on the posture, the breath.
Yeah, I'm
I personally love to learn more. I mean, I would want you to share more, but I
well, I'm
also
not
want to
gonna
be, yeah.
well, I'm not going to demonstrate it. I'm just saying
Okay.
these are the things that we will work on, but I would
Mm-hmm.
never demonstrate a pattern
Mm.
online. But I can tell you it involves the breath, it involves what the body, and it involves the face. But beyond that, um, I do not demonstrate because, as you indicated earlier, we have empathetic responses to what people are doing. And as soon as I
Mm.
start doing a pattern, those who are watching this are going to intuitively, instinctively respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not there to monitor their reaction to it or to give feedback on it. So I would never do it. A demonstration out of context of a larger conversation.
I appreciate that. I I think for me, you saying those three components, and what it reminds me is that we are paying attention to different parts of our body, and our different parts of our body are contributing to this in a precise way.
Absolutely.
And whether it's paying attention to our tongue, or where our eyes are looking, or where our breathing patterns, or our hands, what are our hands doing, what is my overall posture doing, am I
What are
leaning
my
in, leaning
feet
out,
doing?
what are
What are
my
my feet?
feet doing?
I've just been starting working on the feet much more.
Mm,
In the last
mm-hmm.
2 years, I have integrated the feet in a new
Mm.
way.
Then how does that impact? The thing that came to me was this idea that Alba is about induction through the physical route.
Exactly.
But when you talk about context, it's almost like an induction from the cognitive route, the mental route. So like sometimes the
Well,
cognitive, yeah, in life.
in
Sorry,
life,
yes,
yeah,
to be
in
clear,
life,
in
it's the
life, not
cognitive.
in
Yes,
Alba, yeah.
yes,
So in life, we have induction from both routes. We have an
absolutely.
induction from the physical, because maybe I'm doing something with my feet and that's causing my body to feel a certain way. But then maybe there's also thoughts or stories that are coming into my mind that are also, and then also the environment around me and many things.
Exactly. A music that you might hear,
The
that
music,
brings back
yeah,
yeah,
the
the
warm lighting,
smells.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
exactly. All
smells,
of
yeah.
those are
So
inputs.
there's
Yeah,
so much that is inducing our emotional state. And when you talked earlier about being able to step out in life, sometimes that can help reduce the physical induction of that emotion. So it's not physical and thought and smell and everything like hitting us at the same
at the
time.
same time, it can
Yeah,
calm it. It can
yeah,
calm it. Yeah.
and yeah. So I really, huh. One story I wanted to share is that, and it's a bit heavy, but my mom passed away January 2023, is it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in and out of the hospital, and I remember, I think this is when it happened, but it happened a few different times. She was in the hospital, and it was during COVID. I couldn't go in, so I was sitting in the car outside, and I felt myself just sobbing. I was just sobbing, and a part of me went, oh, maybe my chest is too tight, or my belly, like what's going on with my belly? Oh, this looks like a pattern. I was like, no, but I don't want to be feeling a pattern right now. I just want to be,
Right. I just want to cry.
yeah. But as you said earlier, it's almost this conversation. Do I modulate it? Do I not modulate it? Do I tone it down? No, I don't want to. I want to feel this. But
Exactly.
to even be aware that I was going in that direction, or that maybe somebody in my family was or wasn't going in certain directions. Wow. Just to be able to have the conversation. Doesn't mean we always have to agree with what the body is saying, or doesn't mean we always have to or fight it, but to at least stay in the conversation with it.
Yeah, that
So,
self-knowledge, I think, is key.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is that, as I think, I like people doing a lot of this work, because how can I have the conversation with them if they're not having the conversation with themselves? It can be really hard, because they're ignoring what's going on in themselves. I'm hearing it. It's like sometimes I'm having a conversation with their body more than they are. It's like, could you please just listen to your body? Look what your body's doing. It's doing this. Do you not realize your body's doing that? And often we don't. And how to navigate and negotiate all that stuff. I just appreciate you staying this long in this conversation with me while also
It's been a
negotiating those things with
pleasure.
yourself.
Yeah.
So I say maybe we end the conversation there, do a quick reflection, and then say goodbye. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. And what do you actually do end scene in acting, or is that just something that
No,
us non-actors
no,
think that
that's
actors do?
something you non-actors do. Think, no, we don't do that. Now in high school or junior high, they'll sometimes after a scene go scene, but you don't do that once you're in college. No,
Is there any type of threshold that crosses over? No.
no,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
You're
So
just done.
so what is so how was that call for you? What
It was great. It was
Yeah.
great. As I probably told you before, I will talk about Alba anytime I'm asked. I'm so passionate about it, and I think it has such value that I can talk about it anytime at the
So
drop of a
for
hat.
those who are listening, Nancy sounds like she wants to be asked to talk about Alba. So if anyone wants to ask, she will gladly talk.
I will gladly talk.
Yeah, I think that's what I appreciate about this, because I will gladly talk about Alba too. And like, I'm so excited to see you when I see you in person, and that we were able to have a conversation like this, to learn more from you, to share more with you, and to explore it together, because I appreciate so much of the background that you have with when it comes to Alba, but acting and teaching and so many other things too. So
Well, it's nice to have an opportunity and a venue to share it. And I hope this sparks some questions and some conversation among people who watch it, listen to it, and maybe reach out and ask both of us some questions.
And I appreciate that, because I think sometimes we can see these as, oh, this is the end of the conversation. No, this is the start of the conversation. Please. I'm sure Nancy wants to talk about this. I want to talk about
Absolutely.
this stuff. Please, can we talk more about this stuff with each other and with other people, and even with other people in our lives? Just to say, oh, I listened to this podcast and it talked about how, oh, where my tongue is placed may impact my emotional state. So
Who would have
certain things,
thought that? Yeah.
who would have thought that? We don't think about it much. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to ask, when you post this, wherever you post it, do you include information about how they can get a hold of both of us?
Yes, that is one that I love to ask at the end. Is what is a good way for people to get a hold of you?
There are two ways. One is through my website, which is strictly about Alba, and that is just my full name, NancyLoitz.com. So that's easy. Or by email, you can also use that same NancyLoitz@yahoo.com. So it's easy. So
Okay,
either
great.
of those would be fine.
Great. Yeah. I highly suggest you do, just because, again, even if you don't take an Alba class with Nancy, I think you may enjoy asking her questions about Alba and how it may relate to your life or to acting or towards anything that you're really struggling with.
Or if you're interested in taking a class, what I get a lot of just kind of one-offs. Like I'll get somebody from Denmark who says, "Are you ever going to be in Denmark?" Or I'll get one from, North Dakota. "Are you ever going to be in North Dakota?" And no, I'm not. But if you ever want to try and organize a class. But what has started to happen is I'll get a cluster of one-offs in a certain location. So like right now, I have about 6 or 7 people from LA who have over time reached out as an individual. And so now what I'm going to do is reach out to all of them and said, hey, let's have a conversation as a group and see if we can't strategize how to get an Alba class in LA. And so I'll do the same. I've got a few people in Minneapolis, but not enough to make a course happen when I proposed one. But maybe if those of us who are interested in doing it put our heads together, maybe we can organize a class. So if somebody out there from North Dakota or wherever would like to do a class, they look at my page and they don't see any courses, reach out to me and maybe we can put our heads together and figure out how to organize one.
So this is where I feel that fear, like running one of these classes, of, oh my gosh, this might get emotionally intense and lots all the dynamics, because what's coming through my mind is that I have for a long time wanted to build an online forum. I have built an online forum, called I call it Jim and Friends right now.
Mhm.
But the idea is that thinking, if people like Nancy come on the show and other people liked what they heard, maybe they could gather in this forum and have conversation to um, run a class or run a cluster in one of these areas. Because sometimes coordinating is the hardest part. And so if I could
It's
help,
always the hardest
so
part.
if I can help, if that Jim and Friends platform could help people come together and say, I liked what Nancy was talking about. I have more questions. I want to ask her there, or I want to ask Jim some questions, or I want to run a class, and who else is interested in running a class? So maybe this could be a place where people start to gather on some
That'd
of the
be
things they like on the
perfect.
show. And
That'd be
then I
perfect.
can attend more classes of Nancy. Maybe Nancy will do a class in East Africa, and I can go attend a Nancy class in East Africa. That'd be great.
I'll be there.
Hey, Nancy will go anywhere, she says.
I will. I will. Have
So,
Alba will travel.
so yeah. Other than that, what one last thing. One thing you may have learned on the call or appreciated.
I think it's reinforcing for me the challenge my students have integrating back into a world of non-Alba people. I think you've come back to that numerous times in terms of I see them experiencing this. I don't know what to do with that. Do I confront them? Do I acknowledge it? So I think it's how do you navigate the transition after Alba? And I think it's something I need to talk more about in my courses, and maybe have visitors come in. I've had people come in before that I'll do a Zoom class where previous students will come in and talk about how they've applied it. Actors will come in and talk about how they applied it. People will talk about how it's integrated into their life. But maybe I need to ask this question. I've never asked that. Have you run into challenges having a knowledge or an awareness that other people may not have? And how has that either positively impacted or created difficulty for you?
Yeah.
It's like being the only Spanish speaker, in a room full of people watching a Spanish movie or something. What do you
And then laughing at the joke,
and
and
then
nobody
laughing
else,
at the joke
and
and
nobody
nobody
else is
else gets it.
laughing.
And you saying to them, why aren't you laughing? That's funny.
Wow.
So I think I've missed that piece in terms of, because I went through it. As I told you, I went through it when I came back and my students were saying, would you quit doing that? And I've been doing it long enough that I've assimilated it into who I am, so that I'm not constantly thinking about Alba and people's emotions anymore, the way I used to. I used to feel like, again, like I had X-ray eyes, and now it's not like that anymore. It's much more integrated. So I think that's a conversation I need to have with more students.
I love that analogy of listening to Spanish and nobody else understands Spanish and laughing. That has happened to me so many times in my life. and it plays on how this is a language. This is a structure and a form of communication that a lot of us don't understand and we haven't learned. We've actually often been taught not to learn it when we're kids. Stop
Right,
doing that.
exactly. Yeah.
Stop speaking Spanish. Stop
Well,
speaking
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Stop speaking
yeah,
that. I don't understand it. Stop speaking a language I don't understand.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, of course, that happens in homes with second languages when they're told not to speak their native language at school or whatever. And it's the same thing we do with emotions. They say, don't do that. Crying doesn't belong in church, or this doesn't belong here. And maybe it's a good analogy, because we've shut down, multiple languages in this country and relying on English because people are often taught that's the right way. But that's a completely different conversation.
Yeah, this idea that people, so that's one of the things that's really going to stick with me, is this last point, that parents often don't speak the language and kids are speaking that language, and parents don't understand the language because
They've unlearned it.
they've unlearned as they started to speak it, their parents told them, stop speaking this language.
I
And
think
then
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
and then
This
yeah,
language of emotions. Yeah.
yeah. And then how it can be like speaking a different language. But what if we want language to change? And so for me, that's the second point, is that as much as I enjoy conversations, maybe the bigger work is bringing people together on a platform so that the conversation can continue, and so that things can blossom out of this instead of just the one-off podcast. I think a lot of podcasts have conversations that people listen to on their headphones, and then it doesn't go very far from there. And so what if this can be an organizing mechanism to help people, help you meet Mary? Mary was really excited to learn about your work. And maybe that means you go out to DC and run a class with Mary out there.
Mm-hmm.
Or you come out to Uganda when we go to Uganda, because Mary went with us to northern Uganda to help my friend Pavel's organization that does peer counseling in the villages. So maybe you go and run it out in the village, like, so maybe really taking you into the bush,
Sounds good to me.
So, yeah. So thank you for being open to the conversation and also bringing your energy, because for me,
thank you.
I like expression. So I'm glad most of the time. So I'm really grateful that you are available for that.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. It was good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Hope to see you in person soon. And everyone who listened, thank you for listening to all this, and hope to catch you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.